So people say, well, I'm afraid of getting blood clots. Well, the incidence of getting blood clots are going to be higher if you actually get the COVID-19 virus.
Dr. Jonathan Bakhtari.
You can see it. I mean, it's crystal clear.
I think it's going to really revolutionize things.
Which is a big game changer.
So in this episode, what I'd like to do is kind of maybe hit on all of or some of the questions that people often ask me about the pandemic and the COVID-19 virus. So let me try to go through those. And, as usual, my job is to make sense out of some of the noise that goes around. Some things are true, some things that are not so true, and maybe some things in the middle. But let's clarify some of the questions and concerns that people have at this stage of the pandemic. The first question I really want to go over is this idea that, hey, maybe I don't need the vaccine if I get sick. I'm going to use a whole cocktail. I'll take azithromycin, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, doxycycline, zinc, and what have you. And they have this cocktail already, which I actually don't have an issue with. But the question is, hey, can I use that in place of getting the vaccine? And, my answer to this is kind of twofold, because even if some of that stuff eventually turns out to have some efficacy, it's sort of beyond me how that would stop you from getting the vaccine. If anything, what you want to do is you want to kind of do all the above. And if we know, for example, the vaccine, if you accept the data, is very efficacious, and you want to add other things that maybe haven't been proven, but you think might be proven, or you just feel better because you heard it somewhere, as long as it's safe, I guess I don't have a problem with it. But I don't really understand how saying, well, I'm going to take this so I don't have to do this. In life, we sort of take multiple precautions. And even with other disease states, often we do, if you have a heart attack, we may put you on medication, but we also may make you lose weight. We may, have you do cardio rehab. So this idea that one thing will take the place of another thing is not something we normally do anyway. So why would we do it in this place? So, let's use something that's very effective, that we know is effective. If on top of it, people who have had heart attacks from stress go on to do prayers, meditation, biofeedback to lower their cortisol level, to remove stress, that's all an additive and probably works on some level and is good, and I promote it, but that wouldn't be in place of your heart medication, if that makes sense. My next thing is to talk about those alternative medications. Broadly speaking, these sort of off-the-shelf medications that we've had for years, whether it's ivermectin, or azithromycin or others that have been sitting on the shelf and we're just going to reuse it for this purpose. I brought this up in one of my other videos, but a virus is quite different than almost anything else. It doesn't make itself amenable to off-the-shelf drugs usually, only because the virus is not an organism you can attack very easily. It doesn't have any machinery, as I have said before, to attack. And that's normally how we kill germs. We attack germs by finding a vulnerable part of their metabolism, reproduction. Since viruses on their own don't have metabolism, and since viruses on their own don't replicate unless they're inside of a host, in this case, a human host, a human cell, it's very difficult to attack a virus, even generically speaking. Sort of trying to get to someone, who's sitting inside of a plane from outside the plane. It's hard to get at them without damaging the plane. And so this is why antivirals as a class are very difficult to develop, because we're trying to attack something that's sitting in a cockpit of a plane that we really like and cherish, like our body or our cells. So antivirals are very, very difficult to produce. We talked about this with HIV. It took decades to come up with effective antivirals. And that's really because of this need to try to figure out where to attack a virus that's already actually inside of our cells. So is it possible that one of these off-the-shelf medications will one day be a good antiviral medication towards COVID-19? It's possible. It's possible. I just think it would be very difficult. I think the odds, argue against it, but it's theoretically possible. Traditionally, we've had much better luck addressing viruses with vaccines, HIV being an example where we haven't been able to do that, come up with an effective vaccine yet, but there's certainly a Nobel Prize waiting for someone who figures that vaccine out. But generally speaking, it's very, very difficult to attack a virus that's already inside our body. So again, I'm a little skeptical of some of the repurposed on-the-shelf medication becoming effective antivirals. Is possible, but it would be very difficult. And I guess, you're going to hear this, from a lot of people and why you should believe them on this medication or that. But, I'm a pulmonary critical care expert. I've been practicing specifically vaccine medicine for over 10 years, way before the COVID pandemic. So, yeah, it is my opinion that I think some of these medications are going to be very difficult to prove effectiveness as possible. It's my opinion, but why should my opinion count? My opinion should count, I think, because this is what I've been doing for a very long time. Everyone has their opinion. Hopefully, I can share with you my experience and knowledge of practicing medicine all these years and being a vaccine specialist for more than a decade. I've gotten most of my questions from people who've come up to me and approached me and emailed me. But if you also have questions, feel free to put in the comment section below. I will try to address those in the upcoming videos. Or if you have some ideas that you want me to cover, I'm more than happy to do that also. Let's talk about the side effects. So, a lot of people who are hesitant to get the vaccine often point to potential side effects. And what's interesting is that almost any side effect that we have heard about, no matter how rare, with the COVID vaccine is almost by definition, there's a higher incidence of it if you actually get the virus. So people say, well, I'm afraid of, getting blood clots. Well, the incidence of getting blood clots are going to be higher if you actually get the COVID-19 virus, or heart issues, or any of the very rare side effects. While still rare in some cases, they're still at a much higher proportion if you actually get the virus than if you get the vaccine. So not getting the vaccine because you're afraid of side effects doesn't make sense, since you may potentially get some of those same side effects with the virus anyway. I just want to take 1 minute and just say, if you like some of the content that we're producing and you've learned something from these videos, please make sure you like and subscribe and leave comments about what you want to hear. We really like to think the material we're presenting in these videos is original. We don't think you're going to find most of the concepts or how we put them together anywhere else. And if you like them, and if you feel they're original and helpful and you're enjoying them, please like and subscribe and put comments about what you want to hear, and also share your experiences with us and how it relates to what we're saying. The other question that I hear is, should I wait between the flu shot and the COVID vaccine? And generally speaking, in the world of vaccine medicine, waiting between vaccines is not a thing. The only time it's a thing when a handful of vaccines that we have that we call live vaccines. They're actually live viruses. But with the mRNA vaccines, certainly, and the flu vaccine is not a live vaccine unless it's the nasal one, but for our purposes, it's not a live vaccine. So I think for non-live vaccines, there's no reason to wait, and certainly you wouldn't want to wait and then come down with either the flu or COVID-19 while you were waiting. So definitely, if you're offered both, to go ahead and get them. And in fact, there's something in the works to potentially combine the COVID and the flu shot potentially for next flu season. So as far as I know, I can't think of a reason not to get the COVID vaccine for medical reasons, because what's in the COVID vaccine is generally not in other vaccines that you may not have tolerated. So to get it because you don't tolerate tetanus shot or something else, I'm not sure it would cross-apply in terms of getting an exemption, a medical exemption, to get the COVID-19 vaccine. As far as I know, there is nothing I can think of that would prevent someone from getting a COVID-19 vaccine for medical reasons. Now, it may not be effective in someone who doesn't have a strong immune system. Let's say you just had a bone marrow transplant, or you've gotten a lot of chemotherapy and your immune system is weakened. So you may not be able to generate a robust response to a vaccine. but not being able to generate a robust response is different than saying I shouldn't get the vaccine. It may not be as effective in terms of, generating an antibody response, but that would just be almost like a, failure to get the antibody response, but you shouldn't have an adverse effect because you didn't generate a strong antibody response. The next topic I'm going to cover is, why should children get vaccinated? I know the COVID-19 vaccines that have been approved in 12 and above. And, the question comes up, why should we vaccinate children? Well, first of all, the amount of pediatric hospitalization with the Delta variant has significantly gone up. And so we know more kids are getting it. And also, as part of preventing population transmission, the more of the population we can vaccinate, the more likely we are to reduce the transmission rate within the general public. So those are all really good reasons to vaccinate children. The study on children 5 to 11 should be coming out at the end of November and potentially approved for use by then. The study looking for 6 months to 5 years old should be coming out in December based on things that I've seen. So I would say within the last quarter of this year, we should potentially see approval of the COVID-19 vaccines for the younger population, the children. So that's coming. The other question is, vaccinating women when they're pregnant. And I certainly hear the concern. I think rightfully so. Many parents are concerned when they're expecting. But I think the question really is, what happens if you get the vaccine and we know it's safe, versus what happens if you get COVID while you're pregnant? Because it's not necessarily like I won't get COVID and I won't get the vaccine. That might be out of your control. So when deciding on whether to get the COVID vaccine during pregnancy, you also have to decide, am I okay with getting COVID during pregnancy? And if you're worried about the vaccine might go through the placenta, again, there's very little data that that's true, but then you also have to wonder, will the virus go through the placenta if I get COVID? So it's not like I won't get the vaccine and I won't get COVID. Sometimes that might not be the two choices. The next thing I want to talk about is boosters. So we're seeing a very slow rollout of the boosters. A few weeks ago, it was rolled out very limited to people who are very immune compromised. We're seeing some back and forth between the FDA and CDC now about high-risk population, elderly population, people at risk. And I think what we're really seeing is a slow rollout of the boosters, however you get there. I doubt you'll be watching this video in 3 months and not everyone will be offered the booster. I think that will be the case just because the vaccine efficacy is starting to drop after 2 doses. I think that's very much probably tied in to the antibody levels dropping after 6 to 8 months. And I think, we're all on our way to our 3rd booster. And I think the outstanding question really to answer in 3, 6, 12 months is this really a booster or is it a 3-shot series? I talked about that in my video last time. I'll provide a link up there. You can take a look at that video. But as I said on that video, today's 1st booster is tomorrow's 3-shot series, potentially. If it's not, then, and it turns out that we're just going to have to do this potentially annually, like the flu, that would be different. So the question really is going to be, is getting 3 shots going to give you lifelong immunity? We're going to find that out if 3 shots will give you lifelong immunity, even against other potential variants that may come out, or are we going to be coming up with a new version of the vaccine every season to cover the known variants at that time? So those are things in the future we're going to find out. People ask me, what are the chances that this will be a 3rd and final booster and give us lifelong immunity versus something that we're going to get more seasonally potentially? I think the data is 50-50. I think the things that argue that it will become seasonal, our coronaviruses tend to reoccur after a year or 2 despite being infected. So we know coronaviruses in general don't give you lifelong immunity often. Can get them over and over, although there are many types of coronaviruses also. And I think the fact that the antibody levels are dropping and we're seeing reduced vaccine efficacy potentially points in that direction. But having said all that, I still think the data is out. I think I don't want to say we have an equal chance, but I don't think anyone could confidently say whether this third booster will give us lifelong immunity or just buy us more time until we need a seasonal one. But I think, I don't want to say it's 50-50, but it's could go either way. The question, if you're watching this video a year from now, for the first booster, was that the last one in a series, or was that one of sort of a yearly booster or every few year booster? We'll see. So I also want to say that a lot of people who've watched our videos have told me how they've shared the video with others, and it's really made an impact, because some of the, especially the COVID content we're putting out, serves up the information in a balanced and fair way and allows people to make the right decision. So please feel free to share this with other people in your circle, people you love, family members, just so they can have the right information, because medical information, especially this pandemic information, is convoluted. It comes from different sides, different angles, different agendas. And here on this channel, we just break it down to you. We give you the straight science in a way that is meaningful and resonates and helps you make decisions. So the question is, should we space out some of these vaccines, the COVID vaccines, more or less? I think during a pandemic, when there is significant mortality from this virus, I think you have to balance, spacing out these vaccines too long to see how effective they are versus 3 or 4 weeks versus someone catching it while they're waiting 2-3 months between doses. So, just it's simply, it's more like the dosing of the how much micrograms of the mRNA you put into the vaccine. I mean, having more is not always better, because then you might have more side effects, and waiting longer may not be of any benefit, and you may expose people to catching it while they're waiting. So it's not always clear that there's benefit in one way, but no downside. The question was, is there any benefit to spacing the vaccines any further out? And even if there was a benefit, we would have to do the clinical trials to prove it. We can't just arbitrarily on our own try it, because let's say there was no great benefit, then we've waited for no reason, and potentially people could get sick during that period. People will say, if I get vaccinated, do I have to wear a mask? So the mask strategy in a pandemic is not, yes, you wear a mask, everyone will be safe. No, if you don't wear a mask, everyone won't be safe. But wearing a mask in conjunction with a bunch of other things could potentially help, especially in an indoor situation. Obviously, if you're indoor with a lot of other vaccinated people, that may not be the case, but maybe if you're an indoor with a lot of unvaccinated people, and let's say you have pre-existing conditions, it's just simply one more layer of protection that you're giving yourself. And the better quality that mask is, of course, the better, And so I think, just like everything we do, it's not like this is the one thing you do and you're good, and this is the, and if you don't do that thing, you're no good. I think it's adding layers and layers of protection, especially if you're immunocompromised or have risk factors, or you're going to be in a place where there's a lot of people and potentially a lot of unvaccinated people. It probably makes sense to add layers of protection. The other thing is that people say, I don't want to get the vaccine because I'm very careful, or I'm just going to take extra precautions and I'm not going to get the virus. And I think at this stage of the game, it's pretty clear that, maybe everyone's going to get the virus at some point. The question may be, what's your immune status? How much antibodies do you have when you finally get it? So I think if you view it that way, the question is, how much protection do you want when you finally get exposed to the virus? Because at the rate we're going, it's not like you're not going to get the virus and you're not going to get the vaccine and everything will end like that. I think how it's going to probably end is we're all at some point going to be exposed to the virus. And the question is, how prepared will our immune system be? Think of it like, you're going to go on a 2-mile hike, how many bottles of water do you want with you when you start the hike? You want 1 bottle, 3 bottles, 4 bottles? I mean, Someone could argue the better prepared you are. And, we do this in life with other things. We know, something's coming. And so we just get extra prepared. And I think at the beginning of the pandemic, it was more like, well, some people will get it, some people won't, or some people will be exposed and some people won't, because the first two SARS and MERS pandemic sort of, just went away on its own. And, there was feeling, okay, it'll come around for a few months and then it'll just go away and I'll be extra careful. But if you really stop viewing it like that, it really will, make you probably decide to get the vaccine. The other thing I want to talk about is people who say, I'm really afraid of the genetic material that's in this vaccine, which is mRNA, because I don't want it to, get inside of my body and alter my genes and what have you. And first of all, that's not how the vaccine works. The mRNA goes into your cells and your own cell machinery produces the spike protein. It doesn't actually infect your chromosomes, as it were. But even if you were going to stipulate that it was, which is it doesn't, if you get infected with COVID, you're going to make billions of copies of the virus in your body. If you don't like an mRNA vaccine, and the alternative is an mRNA virus, that's going to make billions and billions of copies in your body and go to your brain and go to your liver and go to your GI tract and your heart and to your muscles and replicate in all those organs. And that's going to be the full sequence, the full RNA sequence of the virus, making billions of copies. It's just kind of hard to say I'm not in favor of getting someone to inject a small amount of genetic material into my deltoid muscle, which will disappear in a couple of days, versus getting a virus that's going to replicate in my body with millions and billions of strands of RNA for several weeks. So if you had a choice between the two, I would make the argument you're better off getting a small portion of the RNA for the spike protein in your deltoid than having the full genetic sequence of the virus roam through your whole body, making billions of copies. So the other question I often get is, what about the long-term side effects of the vaccines, the mRNA vaccines? So I've already gone over that multiple times. If you want a link to one of the videos, just look up there. But I just want to reiterate just a little portion of it for people who haven't seen it. If you've seen it, just skip over this. But the real issue is, first of all, COVID-19 virus and the infection that goes with it, as we all know, come with long-term side effects often. And they include, memory fog, mental status issues, fatigue, and other long-term side effects in a small percentage of the people who get it. And there's a lot of recent reports looking at CAT scans of the brain and how the virus impacts brain cells and causes atrophy and what have you. So to speak of the long-term side effects of the vaccine without also talking about the known long side effects of the virus may not be totally fair. But in terms of, long-term side effects of the vaccine, if you understand that the vaccine itself disappears in your body after 48 hours, and even the spike proteins that it creates for your immune system to create antibodies towards, even they disappear after 48, 72 hours. So the idea that something that disappeared in your body will give you a long-term side effect is possible, but it kind of goes against logic because it's actually disappearing. It's sort of like if you had a sandwich and 5 years later you had a belly pain. I guess it's possible, but if you assume that it's disintegrated and it's gone, it's not going to give you long-term side effects. Now, the argument could be made, well, the antibodies it produces will produce long-term side effects. That, I guess, theoretically may be true. And that's where I would point to other vaccines, and other vaccines where you do produce antibodies have side effects. But by and large in the vaccine world, most side effects to vaccines as a class tend to be short-term, often immediate to short-term, and slightly mid-range. But very few vaccines will you get a tetanus shot and 6 years later you're like, oh, I have this, I have this side effect. So as a class, vaccines don't lend itself to long-term side effects appearing is possible. And I think when you couple that with the fact that the vaccine essentially disintegrates after a few days, when you put that together, anything's possible. But even if there were a small percentage of long-term side effects, you have to then put that up against the long-term side effects of getting COVID and then say, which one has a higher incidence of side effects. And, we know from studies the incidence of even the short-term rare side effects of the COVID vaccine are nominal compared to the almost similar side effects with getting the vaccine versus the virus. And the other question I get is, if I've been infected with COVID and I have a good antibody response, ideally, do I need to get the vaccine? We don't know which immunity lasts longer. We don't know if the immunity from getting infected lasts longer or getting the immunity, the antibody levels from getting the vaccine. So if you don't know which one's going to last longer or permanent or for life, let's say, then you're betting that you know which one it is. And since we don't know which one it is, it's probably better to bet on both horses than one, if I can use that analogy, because if you do both, whichever one would have lasted longer, you'll benefit from until the data is out. There may come a time where the data will be out that natural immunity, because there are many things, for example, if you get measles or if you get chicken pox, you don't need the vaccine. So that concept does exist, that if you've gotten the disease, you don't need the vaccine. We just don't know if that applies to this virus. And until we have the answers, it's probably better to sort of bet on both horses as opposed to just one. So I think the other question I get is, now that the Delta variant's out and we have breakthrough cases, and like we talked about in my video from last week, for example, with the Pfizer vaccine, the vaccine efficacy is dropped into the 40s, potentially based on that study. Why should I get the vaccine? Well, first of all, even if you say 40, 50%, that's better than zero, right? Because, 40, 50%. So if you take a population and you give the vaccine and 40% don't get the virus, that's better than if the 40% also got the virus as well as everyone else. So from a broader perspective, it's efficacious. It wasn't as efficacious as before, but it's still efficacious. So that's number one. And it's still unclear, but there is some suggestion that even if you do get a breakthrough case, you're probably going to clear the virus sooner or better than if you didn't have it. But the other thing is that we know the vaccine efficacy in terms of death and severe hospitalization is still pretty good. So if you use that as a marker, for sure you should get it. We're just talking about, the vaccine efficacy has gone down for catching it, but it hasn't gone down for dying and getting a severe infection and winding up in the hospital. So again, it's sort of like, unless this thing is perfect, I'm not doing it. I don't think we practice medicine that way anyway. You go in for surgery. Sometimes it doesn't solve the whole problem. You go for back surgery. If you get 40% better from the back surgery, potentially some people say, oh, that's a win. They don't say, unless you can get rid of everything and I'm going to be brand new, like I'm 20 years old and nothing ever happened to me, I don't want that surgery. In medicine, we try to, move the curve towards better, not necessarily totally gone. If you use those markers and if you use the markers of, dying, they're unbelievably valuable. So, people ask me, what to tell people who are still have some vaccine hesitancy. Well, I mean, obviously at the end of the day, we have to be respectful to people who want or don't want any medical drug or vaccine. And so one is to treat everyone with respect. But number two, I think we're really coming down to a core group of people who are probably, it's going to be very difficult to move them. As more people agree to get the vaccine, I think we're being reduced to a group that are just not going to be moved easily. And on some level, this Delta variant is playing out to be a pandemic of the unvaccinated, if you look at numbers. And so however you get there, a lot of people are not in that group are not going to be moved. I think, if they haven't already gotten the COVID infection, they're looking at a high likelihood of contracting it. So as long as everyone has an informed idea of what people are up against, they can make their own decision. But I think generally speaking, I have a lot of patients, I tell them to take a cholesterol medicine. They don't take it, and I tell them to, lose weight and exercise. They don't do it. But I think this is a little bit different in the fact that if you don't take your cholesterol medicine, you're not impacting the population. So I think because population health is at stake here, I think there is this urgency for some people to convince the people who are hesitant to go ahead and get the vaccine. I get that, but I also want to respect the people who don't want to get the vaccine. But it's important that we present the data, the real science, and show them that it is efficacious and it does save lives, and taking the vaccine is the right thing to do. Thank you for watching. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions or have any other topics you'd like me to go over, please leave it in the comment section below. You can also check out my website, BakhtariMD.com, for more content like this. And also you can sign up for my newsletter also on my website. And as always, I'll see you next week on another episode of Bakhtari MD. Take care and be well.